Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about the 2023 Spring D&D OGL 1.1 Leak Firestorm. And what am I going to talk about today? Well, this is just a general update on this absolute incredible firestorm that flames are licking in every direction, and it is... I have never seen anything like this. The level of this is higher than any crisis that has hit Dungeons and Dragons at any point, right? So, I just want to say, I've been thinking, I actively think through this. I'm like, hey, are you talking too much about this, Scott? People are going to get sick of it. Ain't nobody getting sick of this, right? There's no saturation point on this, right? Except for a few tired Europeans. Europeans are like, oh, you Americans are exhausting, right? Well, yeah, we drink coffee, not tea. Catch up. And so, it's, but generally, there's a lot of interest in this subject, right? So one, I don't think I'm reaching a saturation point because I'm going to keep talking about it, right? So, but I listen to I'm not trying to take a note from Nerd Immersion and Professor Dungeon Master. Love both those guys, right? And boy, Nerd Immersion, I feel really bad for him because he starts every... So let's talk about two guys who are impacted most by this, right? Two guys both are in the same boat, right? They both, almost to a day, both got their 100K sub buttons and are just furious and frustrated with D&D. And all it took to douse all the flames of their excitement for D&D was the leak of was not even the real document, just a leak. Right, that's all it took to turn you off of D&D is just a leaked legal document, and now all your love for D&D is gone. Come on, but Nerd Immersion, that poor guy, man, he starts every video with an exasperated sigh now, because. And he genuinely doesn't know what to do, right? Because I think the reason why he has that exasperated sigh is I think he really wants to, actually, I'm pretty sure, tell me if I'm wrong, he had D&D Be Gone as a thumbnail the other day, right? And it was and he really wants to run away from D&D, but I think he knows it isn't. You go out the gates of the walled city, you are in the, a good friend of mine loves Fallout. You're in the irradiated mutant lands, right? Does Nerd Immersion want his best buddy to be Venger Satanis? I don't think so. Does he want to be covering new TSR? Does he want to be covering that guy who makes Lamentation of Flame Princesses? Because when you stand against Dungeons and Dragons, those are your new buddies. Enjoy that, Nerd Immersion. And I have great sympathy for him, but I also I'm really frustrated with him because, hey, you're forgetting what got you that 100,000 sub. I think you are taking things for Nerd Immersion. I'm talking straight to you, buddy. You are forgetting. You owe D&D, and you owe D&D community. I'll tell you right now. You think for 1 second a bunch of OGL 1.0 creators and the OSR got you that 100,000K sub button? They didn't. It was D&D. So you might want to think twice before you put that D&D Be Gone thumbnail up again. It is this is getting real, right? It's incredible. So this is a real moment, and also one of the things I want to do is I want to set the frame and I want to correct some incredibly wrong information that's been going out recently. So one, I want to correct my language, right? I've been saying, oh, this is the OGL 1.0 champions, this is the OSR champions, this is the indie champions. Wrong. It's not the indie champions. The indies have been over there. The indies aren't making a lot of OGL stuff, right? You got your OGL 1.0 creators, right? And frankly, they're not indie. They're copiers. They're not independent. They're literally linked to D&D through their copy culture, right? None of them are independent, right? A good example of a fantastic independent creator is Runehammer Games. He never touched the OGL. That dude's been rolling on his own for... I think he might have one or two products under the OGL, but generally, the most of his content, he never needed, right, the OGL to make amazing things, and he outpaced everybody. In my opinion, Runehammer Games, Hankrin Farinale, he outpaced everybody in the OSR space and everybody in the indie space and never needed the OGL and was never foolish enough to put his hopes and dreams on the OGL, right? Because there's so much at stake here. This is incredible. what is at stake here, right? So, and so one of the things I want to say is I'm going to start trying to correct my language, right? This is the OGL 1.0 creators, the OGL 1.0 champions, right? And the OSR champions, but not the indie champions, excuse me. The indie champions, they've been doing their own thing for a while. They never needed the OGL, right? And I actually have a lot of sympathy for the indies, and I actually really like I'm a huge fan of Runehammer games, right? I say you should play D&D 51% of the time, right? But I've always kept a door open to go try other games, right? But the other thing is I have these D&D goals, right? So I'm not like the rest of you. I'm not going to just sit around while we get outpaced by I really am not. I'm not gonna sit around happy while we're outpaced by the board game industry and while we're outpaced by the video game industry. The tabletop role-playing game industry should be bigger than the board game industry and the video game industry combined, because what we have is better. Flat out, period. End of sentence, right? So, but I'm going to stop lumping the indies in with the OSRs and the OGL, with the OSR champions and the OGL champions, right? The OGL 1.0 champions, right? Because I think they are really going head at Hasbro, and it's no longer like, hey, we want you to change the OGL. They want to topple D&D, like D&D be gone, right? Saying, and now we get to it. And this is what I always said, right? The OGL 1.0 creators and the OGL and the OSR champions, they were never with D&D, right? There are people who stand with D&D and there are people who stand against D&D. And in my humble opinion, the OGL 1.0 creators and the OSR the OSR 1.0 champions, copy culture to the copy culture to the man, to the woman, right? I was about to say, are there any OGL 1.0 female champions? Arcane libraries out there. So the answer is yes, right? And then, but she does a lot of indie stuff too. So I don't know, these Venn diagrams get mixed a little bit, right? And then, so the OGL 1.0 champions and the OSR champions, right? They are standing like flat out against D&D, and now the mask is off. And this is what I was always saying, right? These people don't have any. The OGL 1.0 creators never cared for the legacy of Gary Gygax. They never cared for D&D, and the OSR never cared for the legacy of Gary Gygax. They never cared for D&D, right? And now the mask's off, and we see it. We see it for real, right? And there's going to be people like me who support Dungeons and Dragons, right? When it's hard to, right? Yeah, I know it was easy, a little while ago when everybody was happy. Right, but now things are hard. Are you running off and trying to find your new champion? Pathfinder as a champion in all this. Paizo as a champion in all this. Already done and dusted, right? Like you're looking for somebody to save you in all this, and you go, hey, that person who lost before. like it's so ridiculous. Okay, so let's talk about Paizo. Paizo's ORC. I'm sorry. It's so funny, right? So here's the thing, right? So these OGL 1.0 champions and these OSR champions are like, down with D&D. Let's get a true champion, knows what they're doing. Paizo's got an OGL of their own, right? And so let's tell you, look at this, right? So Paizo releases this new open RPG, right? So it's the Open RPG OGL, which is forever realsies, right? Like, it's going to be realsies forever. And you're like, dude, man, we can barely protect the Constitution, and you think you're going to be able to keep a forever promise made by a corporation, right? And actually they're like, oh no, well, we're going to go find a nonprofit that can help us, because we know you can't trust Paizo either. We're a corp too, right? And so I do think this is very funny, but actually I want to real quick applaud Paizo. You're making a move. That's bold. Hey, I get it, right? Like you have a company you're trying to. This is a moment in time, man. This is a historical moment in Dungeons and Dragons history, and I do applaud Paizo for making a move, right? But one of the things I like, people are like, Scott, why do you support? And they use much more cruel language, right? Why do you support these corporations, right? I'm a capitalist. I want quality, right? Like I don't take for granted what Hasbro does. And that's the point here. These OGL 1.0 creators and these OSR creators take for granted scale. They take for granted bean counters. They take for granted capitalism. And you cannot take these things for granted, right? The reality is Dungeons & Dragons is doing real work, right? Hasbro is doing real work, and they drop a for realsies book every 3 months. And that book's got a nice hardback. That's not a small thing. We used to get these scrub, like, like paperback modules, like these are real books, right? And these are creating a real canon, a real history for Dungeons & Dragons. And it is unmatched anywhere in the OSR, right? Putting out stickered books and books with bowed, bindings and like just quality issues to the nth degree, right? And so that's the thing, is this was all cute, Paizo, and this was all cute, Pathfinder. Oh, we're gonna do our own, and so they put out the Open RPG Creative License, and immediately everybody was like, ORC, Open RPG Creative, ORC, right? Oh, I see you making, you're putting on your big girl pants there and you're doing some real things, right? Look how fast it took for it to turn to Tears and Flames. Look how fast. Do you see it? Does everybody see it? Oh, the thing we're going to name our new Open RPG, Open RPG Creative License, we're going to call it ORC. The thing that caused Tolkien no end of problems, right? Oh, you're basing this on orc. What does that species represent? What does it say culturally, right? And then Dungeons & Dragons had all these problems with orcs, and Pathfinder had all these problems with orcs. The exact species, like this, you attach orc in your title, people are like, oh, so you're just prejudiced like Tolkien. You're just prejudiced like D&D was in the beginning. You're prejudiced like Pathfinder was in 1.0. So you're just going to use this incredibly problematic species as your banner? That seems really prejudiced, right? Like, they didn't even get through the announcement before they had a problem, right? Repeating horrendous problems of Tolkien, TSR, Wizards of the Coast. I don't think Hasbro's been trying to fix orcs for a while, right? I think they're doing the right thing there, right? But the reality is, like, right out of the gate, right? Everybody's like, orc? That's your acronym? That's one of the most problematic terms in all of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, it goes all the way back to the prejudice that people accuse Tolkien of, right? And you're like, and this is the point, right? It's all cute, it's all play, and it's great to revolt. Have fun, throwing virtual Molotov cocktails from the streets up to the mansion, right? I understand that's all fun, but guess what? The day after revolution, you are the conservative, right? And you got every problem Hasbro has, right? And this is the part that you're not hearing from the OGL 1.0 champions, and that you're not hearing from the OSR champions, is the second they actually get to work, who shows up to work, right? Who shows up to work? Venger Satanis, the guy who made Lamentation of the Flame Princess, new TSR, and 100 other monsters you don't want anywhere near what you're building, right? And the reality is, like, that's the future. These guys are going to create something that's better than Hasbro? I don't think so. And the reality is, yeah, it's very cute. I see all your energy. Very, very nice. But the reality is these problems are real. And you're going to have to do real labor, real work, and get real momentum. And where are you going to get that from? A bunch of copiers? I don't think so. Pathfinder ain't your savior. Paizo ain't your savior. The OSR filled with nothing but copiers. A follower to the last man, to the last woman. No leaders amongst them. Nothing. There's no foundation, right? And you're going to need talent to beat Hasbro. And there ain't no talent on the OGL 1.0 champions, and there ain't no talent on the OSR. There's some talent on the indie side. They might be able to bring some of them over, but I doubt it. Those people already got their energy, and they've been moving on their own. They don't need copy culture, right? And so that's where we're at today. So I kind of went in a lot of different directions there, but there's a lot happening, right? So one, thanks for your patience with me covering this so much, and I just wanted to tell you, like, I believe my content, this sits on a shelf, right? I got 8 years of content. If you go back, over 4,300 videos, right, about Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to see a museum of events that were happening in these years. And this is a huge event Thanks for your patience with my content. I know it's not perfect. I'm doing the best I can to cover it. Please let me know in the comments below. Send your traffic. What do you think about all this? Yeah, I've told you my humble opinion. Every word of what you just heard. I want to hear your humble opinion as well. Please consider liking and subscribing and have a wonderful millennium.